This is Expedition Texas, the podcast, presented by Crazy Water. Hello once again, and welcome to Expedition Texas, the podcast. Hi, folks. I'm Bob Malden, coming to you from 31 West Productions here in Tyler, Texas, where we are getting into lost history in Texas, having long-form conversations about it here each and every week, presented to you each and every time by Crazy Water, the best thing to ever come out of the ground in Mineral Wells, Texas. You can check it out on the bottled water aisle at your favorite grocery store, or make the trip to Mineral Wells and get yourself a whole case or a big old jug, whatever you want there. Mineral Wells, Texas, and Crazy Water, the pride of Mineral Wells, Texas, presenting Expedition Texas, the podcast, each and every week here. And, of course, we're also presented by the East Texas Oil Museum at Kilgore College. Get out and learn a little bit of East Texas oil field history there. And we're going to talk a little bit about oil today. Actually, we're going to talk a lot about oil today because if you've watched Expedition Texas on TV anytime in the last 10 years or so, the longest running sponsor of that TV show for pretty much the last 10 years has been the city of Van, Texas. And I know that when the city of Van first started, we were thinking, okay, what can we promote to get people to come to Van? And I tell you what, each and every year that has become more and more and more. And so a lot of times when we're doing this podcast, I'm not thinking too much about getting sponsors involved in it, but when you get into some of the history of that city, there's a lot that we can talk about here, and not just about the things that we want to talk about on Expedition Texas when they are, with them being a sponsor, getting people to come visit, maybe live, work, and do business there, which is kind of the goal of that partnership. The goal of this today is to get into some of the history of that, which is what we're going to do. And before we do that, I was talking to Tammy and Sarisa there, and they told me to be sure to let everyone know that coming up very soon, December the 7th, is the Van Christmas Experience. That is going to be Saturday, December the 7th, and there's so much going on. The lighted Christmas parade, which has been a tradition in Van since when I grew up there. The tree lighting, pictures with Santa, and fantastic, yes, I said that right, fantastic photo ops provided by local businesses. That is going to be happening December the 7th, vantx.gov, vantx.gov. And if you have any questions, call 903-963-7216. We're going to make sure we tell you about that again before we end things today. But first, folks, I want to introduce our guest. And pretty much with anybody having anything to do with Van, we kind of go way back because I went to school from first grade through the 11th grade in Van. I actually transferred out of Van before I graduated to start my radio career. And it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. I was very excited about starting my radio career, but having to leave and go to a different school to finish out my high school years after having been with the people I went to school with my entire life was like a really hard decision. And you probably can imagine, it's small town Texas. You know everybody. And that is the case here today as I welcome my third grade best friend's dad, who was the local insurance man in Van, and he's here to tell us all the history today. We go back a long ways, too. Please welcome Dwayne Wheeler. Hello, sir.
Thanks, Bob. Good to be here.
It's good to have you here in the studio. It's fun to be sitting here and talking about something that we've had in common for so long, which is that great city in East Texas, Van, Texas.
Van's been there for a long time. I moved there in 1977 from Garland. And when I moved there were no sidewalks, no garbage pickup, one blinking red light, and Now we're sporting two Loves truck stops on I-20.
Competing right across the street from each other. Maybe we'll get into that here in a little bit too, because I have questions. But we'll get to that later on. We have had a long-running relationship on Expedition Texas with the city of Van because the city of Van has been a supporter and used Expedition Texas and our broadcast to tell people what's going on in the city of Van for a really long time, and it's a big honor to be able to do that for my old hometown. And so, we've been telling about some of these big events. Of course, the big oil festival that happens there, and the Christmas events. We even did a Christmas with Expedition Texas there at one time. We did a couple of Expedition Texas episodes. We went out and saw the old water treatment plant there with Charles West when he was there, and went out in the woods. I think on like a side by side, and found the old like original sewer plant that was there from way back in the day, and just some cool lost history in Van. But I want to go back. First memory I have of trying to like find anything historic or have anything to do with that has to do with Van. I was in my second grade class, and my homeroom teacher was Cheryl Parrish. I guess you know her, and she was my second grade teacher, and she was talking to us about the importance of the oil discovery in Van. And she was trying to tell us, and of course we were second grade, so our direction skills were not too great. But she was telling us about where the Discovery Well was, and how oil was first struck in Van, and of course I'm trying to that day on the way home I'm trying to get my mom to find it because I want to see where this is, and trying to find it became a recurring theme in my life, as you can see. But the history of Van, did it start with the discovery of the oil?
The oil was discovered in 1929. The
Okay.
Discovery Well came in 1929. Prior to that, Van was a sleepy cotton farming crossroads.
Really?
There was just a crossroads community there. There was really no town, and the area was called Swindoll. That was the name of the little crossroads area. When oil was discovered in 1929, it went from being a sleepy crossroads to a thriving metropolis, if you can believe this,
Yeah.
of about 50,000 people.
My goodness.
They were Linda Mays, our local historian, was telling me that at one time there were 10 grocery stores, 15 or 20 hotels.
My goodness.
It was just a booming town in 1929 when oil was discovered.
And one of the things that I heard, we just finished up a series on the TV show about the East Texas oil field, the one around Kilgore, and it kind of brought in that whole area with the Daisy Bradford number 3 and all that. One of the things that Olivia Moore mentioned when she was talking about the other communities around East Texas that experienced oil booms was about how when Van struck oil, there was more of a mindset of making it last.
It was an innovative thing in those days because, of course, they wanted to produce as much oil as they possibly could, but their engineering approach was to sustain the field for as long as possible. And so, consequently, 95 years later, today, oil is still being produced out of that field. Now, it's not as much as it was.
Right.
But oil still comes out of that field because they went into the project with the mindset of sustaining that field over a long period of time. It was really a kind of an earth-shattering thing in those days to approach it from that standpoint. But Pure Oil was one of the leading companies that wanted to produce it and sustain that production over a long period of time.
And that's one of the things that I didn't realize about Van, because the wells there, if you go through there to this day, they're still pumping, and at different times of the day, different ones will be on. But the fact that field is still producing to this day, and I only recently learned why, and that's because of that forward thinking that the original engineers had. So Pure Oil, you mentioned them. Heard a lot about that name growing up around Van. Tell me about that company.
Well, it's Pure Oil out of California. Was one of there were about 4 companies that produced the field, but the leading company was Pure Oil.
Okay. And there were several different operations that were kind of involved. And when we were there, one of in fact, I think it was for the Christmas episode that we did several years back, probably 5 to 7 years ago now at this point. This was still there near the oil museum. There was there were lots of shops out kind of it was right up against the road, and there was a lot of pipe and different things like that looked like those were like implements for the oil field. Was that what that was? Was that sort of their yard?
There was a pipe yard there one time adjacent to where the oil museum is now. That pipe yard was actually owned by Roco,
okay,
which was a drilling company, owned by the Rowan family. They have since they sold their operations to another company.
And that is all gone out there now, right? That's kind of a field again now. But the Van Oil Museum is a fascinating peek into Van's past. And one of the things that we did when we went out there and visited the oil museum is they have a collection of the old yearbooks in there. And I went through and actually on camera for the show found like my second grade picture in there. It was kind of cool to show that and see those yearbooks. So Van, I guess, became a city. As big of a city as it is, but at what point did they change from Swindoll to Van? Do you know when that?
Mm-hmm. It was right about 1929 or so. The post office was opened up, and it was named the Van Post Office.
Okay.
At that particular point in time, so it was about the time that the oil came in that Van became a city. They chartered and had a post office. And
at which point, I guess, was that named, was same as like Van Zandt County is the same? Is that where did they get just Van from? Do you know?
I'm not real sure where the name came from. Mm-hmm. It is on one of these historical markers. There's 8 historical markers in the city limits of Van, which per capita, that's unusual.
Yeah.
To have that many historical markers in one city limits. But our historians, Linda Mays and her sister, were largely responsible for that. In fact, for the oil festival this year, we had a bicycle tour of the 8 historical markers, and it started out by the old administration building and then went through town and ended up at the oil museum. And it was a great thing, well attended.
Oh, do you mind? Are those photos of the historical markers?
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at those because that might be some thought starters here as we go on. So the school, of course, I see the administration building there in the background. That building goes back how far? Was that the 19? Was that built in 1916? You'll have to look at that. That's
I'm not real sure.
I know that building has some history because back when we were, I think it was in 7th grade or something, we were the earth science or something like that. No, that must have been 8th grade. We were going out and that building would occasionally shed its slate tile roof, and we would pick those up and see examples of slate.
Yeah, it was in 1916 that the Swindoll and Spring Hill school systems were consolidated to form the Van Common School. And that building, that administration building, was at one time a dormitory to house female teachers.
Okay.
So there were living quarters there, kitchens. There was all kinds of facilities for those teachers there to attract the best teachers that they possibly could. And that's where the first historical marker is. And then if you go west from there, you go to the Van School, which is 1929 to 1947. And that school building, about 2/3 of it was blown away in the tornado.
So that was that original building then. And to give folks an idea, we are going to talk about the tornado quite a bit here in just a little bit. But that building was still there up until, was that 2012 or 13 that tornado came through?
2015.
2015,
yeah,
okay.
Mother's Day of 2015.
Okay, and because we were on the road actually shooting Expedition Texas when that came through. We came back through, which... Funny thing, it doesn't matter. My mom is like my weather alert. I don't need the thing on my phone, and because I always get a call when there's bad weather. It used to be back in the day when I was on the radio. We were the ones doing the tornado warnings on the air. and I would be saying the tornado warning on the air, and Mom would call, "Hey, did you know there's a tornado?" Yeah, pretty sure I'm the one that just told you. But yeah, it was. We got a call from Mom, and there was bad weather, and I'm like, "Nah, we're on the road. We're not there right now." And so, but we came back through and saw just what was on I-20 was devastating, and then getting into Van. We'll get into that here in a little bit, because I want to talk about that and the effects and the changes that happened because of that. But yeah, so I don't remember where I was going with that. I've wandered off topic here a little bit, but yeah. So, that building, the school building. That building, I guess, was then there up to 2015. I remember, and pretty much anybody that went to school in Van went through that building. For us, it was junior high. At one time, it was like the high school, and I guess even going back to the beginning, it was the school.
It was the school system.
Yeah.
All the schools, that was in one building there.
Wow. And that was such a neat building, because they had an upstairs band hall that emptied out over the gym. And for the time period that gym was there, I mean, everything in Van, and you can see this with the buildings that are there still, everything in Van, had a big boost from that oil money. Mm-hmm. That it showed up a lot in the way the schools were built, the that building, and some of the really neat features that building had, and big athletics departments and gyms, multiple gyms in the same complex, and shower rooms and things like that for the athletes and all that connected to the school itself and the classrooms. And then going on down a little further, the auditorium, which is still there, thank goodness. That auditorium was spared. That beautiful auditorium is such a treasure to the city of Van, and it's great to see that that's still there. But that building, unfortunately, was lost in that tornado, and that was a pretty powerful hit, because that was a solid brick building.
It was, and it was just an amazing thing. The architects were able, after the tornado, to save the facade of part of that building, to maintain that architecture, and then they honored that architecture when they rebuilt all of the schools back behind it, so that it matched the same architecture.
Wow.
So it was really good.
Okay, so let's keep going through your he's got a stack here. For those of you who are listening, he's got a stack of these photos and printouts of the historical markers in Van. What's next there?
Well, C.S. Nix is the historical marker that's right in the middle of town. And interestingly, C.S. Nix was a photographer that in 1929 and 1930 was dispatched to chronicle the events of the discovery and the oil field. And I've been in business for 32 years there in Van, and about 28 years ago, my office was the Chamber of Commerce office. And one day we got a box, just a cardboard box in the mail, and we opened it up, and it was hundreds and hundreds of old photographs of
really
the oil field years in Van.
Oh, how cool.
And we looked at it, and there was a note in it, and it was from the heirs of this photographer. All these old photographs had been stored up in the attic in a home in Houston, Texas. And apparently the gentleman had passed away, and the family was going through the attic and found this old box of photographs and mailed them to the Chamber of Commerce office.
Oh, wow.
And that's how I got them. And so it was photographs of all the old oil derricks and all of the events. I've got them on display in my office now, a lot of them, but
yeah.
I donated all of them to the museum.
That's great. Wow.
So his name was C.S. Nix, and he was really largely responsible for photographing all the events of that.
Well, what a cool thing to have, to have that all documented in that way, and then to not know about it until it just shows up in the mail one day.
Yeah, it's unprecedented.
Yeah.
Then there are two historical markers downtown that talk about Swindoll School and how the Van community, previously known as Swindoll, originally developed from a rural farming settlement And George W. Swindoll was who that area was named after, and it was nothing but a cotton gin. And when the post office was put in, then it became Van. There's another historical marker in front of the Van United Methodist Church. That church was chartered in 1885.
Really?
So it's been there that long.
Oh my God! I had no idea that church had been in that spot that long. I guess that's not obviously the original building, but it's a great building. But
it's the third building.
Wow!
So it's been there that long. It started out as a community church. And then there's the Jarman number 1 Discovery Well, and that's on Maple Street, going out to the high school.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you, is where that Discovery Well actually is.
Yep.
Because I don't know that I ever even saw it when I was growing up in Van. I knew it was out there somewhere. I just didn't know what it was.
It's on Maple Street, on the way to the high school.
Okay.
It's Jarman number 1 Discovery Well. And then the 8th historical marker is at the Oil Museum. And there is a 9th historical marker that's at the foundry now. And as soon as it leaves the foundry, it will be erected. And it is commemorating the spur line from Grand Saline to Van. They ran a railroad spur to help move equipment and oil products back and forth. And
see, that was always a thing that was, I guess, folks talked about it, and in school, and we thought, well, there's no way there never was a railroad in Van, surely not. And but we always heard that there was, but there was a spur line that ran from Grand Saline. Where would that have gone?
Well, it came right by where the Oil Museum is now and ran parallel to 16 and terminated. I don't know if you remember, but there was a house on Main Street that had a tennis court beside it.
Yes.
That's where that spur line terminated. And there was a tomato shed at the termination point of that railroad spur.
Okay.
Where they loaded tomatoes.
Sure,
and things.
Use it for that, sure.
And then it would turn around and go back and stop off and pick up oil field supplies and products and then go on to Grand Saline.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Had no idea where that actually ran. That's cool. So I guess would it have come, what's the street that runs beside the Oil Museum now that comes off of 16? In relation to that, where would it's between the Oil Museum and the cemetery there, I guess. And would that be where the rail line came in, or on the other side of the...
That road that runs from 16 and goes around the Oil Museum, that's West Ohio.
Okay.
And it intersected West Ohio and ended up over and crossed what's now Birch Street.
Okay.
And ended up behind that house.
Was that still there when you moved to Van? Mm-hmm. Really? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
When did they pull that up?
I don't know. They came in and pulled all the trestles and the ties and cleaned it up. Now all you see is the raised the raised
you kind
railroad.
of see where the bed was.
Where the railroad bed was.
Okay. That's they did something similar in Tyler, where they came in and pulled up track that ran parallel to Old Jacksonville Highway, and there's almost no sign of it except that the city has now come in and they put walking trails on that right of way in there, and that became what's known now as Legacy Trail. But there's one place, and it's a road where the railroad crossed this road, this little side road, where they didn't pull up the tracks. They were embedded into the asphalt, so they just left them there. And so there's one little road along Old Jacksonville where you can still see there's tracks in the road like that. And I wonder if there's anywhere along that spur where you can see. Not that I
know of. My wife and I have ridden that Legacy Trail on our bicycles, by the way.
Have you?
That's an interesting ride from...
Yeah, it is.
All the way to Flint.
Yeah, and it follows basically that same, and I believe there's plans for it to go even further and follow that all the way into town, into Tyler, where I believe it's going to go to the old fairgrounds complex, which has now been kind of reworked and changed around to where it's got they've remodeled the Mayfair building there, and they put in the new convention center and all that, and goes by the old Rose Garden and all that. So that's it makes me wonder. I love the and it's hard to do a story on something like an old rail line on Expedition Texas, because you're talking about the TV show. You have to have something to see. You have to have something visual, and if it's not there, you can't see it. That's why we don't get to tell a lot of stories about things that aren't there anymore, because our show is about exploring those things. But those old rail lines have always fascinated me, and little bits of where you can see them, and especially abandoned railroad track and all that. But if you've seen 1 foot of abandoned railroad track, you've seen 10 feet of abandoned railroad track, 10 miles, because it's going to all look the same. But to me, that's really cool, and I would love to do a story on all that. But it keeps kind of getting shot down as far as like the as far as camera work. Like, what are we going to show? Where are we going with this?
There's a nationwide network called Rails to Trails, where they convert old railroad beds to bicycle and hiking trails.
Yeah. And I think wasn't that kind of part of what's going on with the Tyler thing too. They're trying to do that with.
It is part of the Rails to Trails.
Awesome, very cool. So I want to get into your story a little bit here in just a little bit. I know that's probably throwing you off there. That's not why you came here to talk about, but I do want to talk about that. I want to talk about what brought you to Van, and kind of your story in Van, and kind of tell about the more modern history of Van when we come back here. And we're going to talk to you in just a little bit about that. We want to talk to you about December 7th. Want you to be sure to make plans, because Van's lighted Christmas parade, tree lighting, pictures with Santa, all kinds of photo ops there in Van. You can get more information at vantx.gov or call 963. It's 903-963-7216. That's 903-963-7216. The Van Christmas Experience. You're always hearing about Van and seeing their commercials on Expedition Texas, and we want to take our time on the podcast to tell you, make a plan, go visit. And we're also going to get into something here in a little bit that you mentioned early on, how there are 2 truck stops of the same exact brand across the street from each other that look like they're competitors, but they're not. They're the same. So we're going to talk about that and see if you have any insight on why there's a Love's truck stop across from a Love's truck stop on the interstate at Van. We'll get into that. That's kind of a humorous note. We'll get into that later on here when we get back on Expedition Texas, the podcast. First, though, I want to tell you about our great sponsor, Crazy Water. The best thing to ever come out of the ground in Mineral Wells. Crazy Water. Now, Mineral Wells, Texas, of course, is known for this water. The waters of Mineral Wells, Texas, have been making folks feel better for the better part of, over 100 years, since 1881. Maybe it's because of the flavor. Maybe it's because of the healing powers of the water that everyone came and flocked to Mineral Wells for. Either way, it is water the way Mother Nature intended it, with electrolytes and other nutrients and minerals. Straight out of the ground. Mother Nature intended it, and it's not from some factory. That is Crazy Water, which you can get, of course, on your favorite grocery store shelf, or head out to Mineral Wells and visit the famous water company. A little bit from Olivia Moore here with the East Texas Oil Museum. We're back with our guest, Dwayne Wheeler, in just a moment.
Do you love history? Do you ever wonder about the way things were almost 100 years ago in East Texas? Visit the Kilgore College East Texas Oil Museum to learn about the men and women who lived during the East Texas oil boom of the 1930s. Step back in time and visit Boomtown, USA, the life-size diorama of a town booming in oil. Step inside the general store and visit the shopkeeper. Head to the theater to watch the Great Oil Boom movie. And no visit would be complete without taking a quick journey on the elevator ride to the center of the earth to learn about all of the geology of the East Texas oil field. The East Texas Oil Museum is now open Monday through Saturday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with last entry at 4 p.m. For more information, visit kilgore.edu/oil museum or find us on all the socials.
We are back here on Expedition Texas, the podcast. I'm your host, Bob Malden, and we are here with Dwayne Wheeler from Van, Texas, talking a lot of Van, Texas history. I want to talk a little bit about your history now, though. So what brought you from Garland, Texas to Van, Texas?
Well, that's interesting, but I was in school, in seminary, and I got my first job was with the Van Church of Christ.
Really?
And so I'd never heard of Van, Texas before in my life. Didn't know it existed. But that's how I ended up in Van.
Well, when we came, it was 83, I believe it was, that my parents moved there. We were, I think they thought they were moving somewhere where we could be in. They thought we were going to be in Canton schools because of where we moved to. They thought but we were literally one street from their school district, and so we ended up in the Van school district. They moved to Colfax there, which I always thought kind of had a cool, backstory also. But and so we had never heard of Van either up to that point, and so it's like, well, you're going to be going to Van, whatever, But it's cool that we are sitting here talking about Van, that I've got this working relationship with the city of Van through Expedition Texas now, after having spent my entire childhood in the schools there. And when you're a kid, the school is a place you have to go. And now with, all the history and all this, the school is a place I want to go because there's so much history in Van, Texas. And we talked a little bit and touched on this a little bit about more of the tragic history of Van. Van was a city that was built on this business, the oil business that we've been talking about here. But the building that I thought I'd never see come down was that school building. And in 2015, you actually corrected me on the date of that earlier, but it was Mother's Day 2015, you said, there was a devastating tornado that came through Van. We were on the road, and as I mentioned, we heard that there had been a tornado touchdown in Van and had no idea. We're driving back in. It's nighttime. We had been out, I believe, in Abilene shooting an episode there, and we're just coming back in through East Texas. It's dark, but there were no lights other than headlights out on the interstate near the big rest area or anything like that. But there were 18-wheelers on their sides on the side of the interstate. I mean, this was a powerful tornado. And were you home when this all happened?
I was actually out on our family farm in Cuero, Texas. My wife was at home.
Really?
And she calls me and said, we're having a terrible tornado warning. And I said, well, get in the bathroom, and she did, and then all power was lost. That was on Mother's Day, Sunday evening, after dark, when this thing came through. And I stayed up till midnight or 1 o'clock trying to get news, and I ended up just loading my truck up and coming home, and I got back about daylight Monday morning. To the total devastation of downtown Van.
It was, we came through at night. We didn't get off the interstate. We knew that it was that definitely was in bad shape, at least there, and needed lots of prayer. And I, having been in radio, we covered a lot of tornadoes when I was on the radio and talked about damage and things like that, and would go out and report on it and talk about it on the radio and all that. And of course, a lot of my TV news friends and people that work on this show even went out and covered tornadoes. And you would have a few maybe roofs ripped off and carport maybe end up in the neighbor's backyard or something like that on a lot of the ones that I've witnessed. But that devastation in Van, because I came through there just I guess the next day when it was light, and it was unrecognizable.
It is. The swath that it started south of Interstate 20 and came across Interstate 20 and came right through the middle of Van over the school system and destroyed, like I said, 2/3 of the buildings in Van. And they picked up debris and photographs and paper from that school over a mile away, out by the high school.
Oh my gosh!
They picked
really?
up photographs and things and schoolwork. So It was two people unfortunately lost their lives in that storm.
Did your wife explain to you anything when you got home about what it was like to be in the middle of something that?
Yeah, she said it was horrible. All the lights went out. There was no power. She was in the bathroom. After the storm passed, she could hear it, and it did sound like a huge freight train coming through.
Yeah.
After it passed, and she thought she could get out, she tried to go across country about a mile to a friend's house and stay with them and couldn't make it. They ended up having to come get her because she...
Was it because of debris?
Down trees.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She just got trapped, so they came and picked her up.
The across from the high school, or the old high school, I guess the school building that was lost, the biggest building that was lost that we talked about earlier. There were a lot of wood frame. It was a neighborhood of wood frame houses. Some of the older houses in Van, and now. The little streets that went through that little neighborhood are still there, but there's not even a trace of that. I guess all of those houses were destroyed that day, and when I came through there, it looked like just piles of sticks. It was terrible.
Just a debris field is all that was left.
And that building that we talked about, that school building, some of the cool features of that building were absolutely gone. That upstairs band hall, that amazing gym, all that stuff was
that was gone.
Yeah.
When they did the final demolition, they cut that gym floor into squares and sold that old gym floor to residents of Van. I have a piece of that old gym floor.
Really?
Yeah,
that's a cool thing to have.
Yeah.
Did that tornado, I mean, the change anything about Van in your eyes, having been there before and after?
Well, it
other than the landscape, obviously.
Yeah, the landscape was completely and utterly changed, and it wiped out whole neighborhoods. I opened my insurance agency in '93, and that storm came through in 2015. I paid out just out of my agency, and there's about 3 insurance agencies there in Van, but just out of my agency, I paid out over $3 million in houses that were total losses, total losses.
Yeah.
So that entire swath, that path of the tornado was completely wiped clean. Now, 2015, almost 10 years later, a great number of those houses have been rebuilt.
Yeah.
And the schools have been rebuilt.
Yeah. The school, and you talked about this, how they kind of picked up the architecture. They were very true to the original look of the school.
They honored that, yeah.
Yeah, when they came in and put that back in there. That what we called the administration building growing up, which was the dormitory you told us about earlier, that building was spared.
That one was spared. It was damaged, and they had to do a lot of rehab to keep it from collapsing because it has columns out front, but they were able to save it.
Yeah.
And they rehabbed it and kept it intact. But the adjacent to that admin building were the tennis courts, if you remember. Those are gone. They're all gone. Yeah.
Well, back in through there was the old stadium. Was that gone by that time? Had they moved to the new stadium by then?
Yeah, the new stadium was in operation, and that old stadium was just it's used for just practice and things now.
Okay, but there was so much that of the those buildings that were just obliterated and gone. That when you grow up there, like the old weight room and different things like that were just part of that were just gone, so it was a lot of devastation and a lot of families that lost their homes down through there, and Van has come back and come back in a big way. I think if you would have told us back in the day that Van would have a Sonic and 2 truck stops out by the interstate and a big travel center on the other side and a Starbucks and all this kind of stuff, we would have said, ha, yeah, right. There's been some forward thinking, I think, in the city of Van here in the last little while. And tell me kind of what was there a shift in the way things were done? Was it just time? Is East Texas just growing so much? What was kind of the change? Van sort of held on to its small town feel for a really long time, and still has that if you know where to go. Out by the interstate, obviously everything's moving forward. But what do you think has kind of been the biggest change you've seen since coming there in '77?
Oh, it's that they've done the city has done a masterful job of maintaining the small town, close-knit community feeling, and yet capitalizing on that corridor from Shreveport to Dallas, which is I-20, which is a lifeline. Mm-hmm. A lot of commerce goes up and down that I-20 corridor. When we moved there in '77, the oil field was still so active that the tax base from oil and gas sales literally sustained the school system, the way of life. Everything fed off of oil and gas revenue from that field. But in that span of time, 40 years, mm-hmm. the oil and gas revenue has declined exponentially. But we have a new oil and gas field, and that's that I-20 corridor.
Yeah.
Now there's 2 Love's truck stops and a pilot travel center out on I-20, and the tax revenue from those 3 truck stops equals or exceeds the tax revenue that ever came out of the oil field.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So that's our new oil field.
Yeah, it's kind of your new. It's new.
It produces a tremendous tax stream.
And it's kind of a gimmicky East Texas thing out there that there are 2 Love's truck stops, and the first one was great, and then the other one came in across the street, and as they're building it, and they started putting up yellow signs, as we pass through there and come to Van all the time and see that and thinking, wait a minute, what are they doing? I thought that they decided to build a new one and they were going to abandon the other one. But they didn't. They kept them both.
They built a new one to cut down on competition.
Really?
Those 2 Love's truck stops in Van are the highest performing by volume and fuel cells, the highest performing Love's truck stops in the nation.
Really?
Yes.
Both of them?
Mm-hmm. Both
wow.
of them together.
And you would think they're competing with each other, but they were doing it to keep something else.
They're locking up competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. That's
the other corner.
Yeah.
The southwest corner across the interstate will never have commercial activity there because it's owned by the oil company.
Really?
So the corner that was bought by Pilot, that was the only available. Mm. Now they've got to go down where 16 runs under I-20.
Yeah.
And we now know that there are travel centers looking at that intersection.
Oh, so they're looking at developing that out there too. Interesting. Yeah. So 16, of course, if you're not familiar with the area, is a farm to market road which comes off of Highway 64, just east of Canton a little bit, and goes into Van, and is pretty much Main Street right through downtown Van, and then at some point it turns into 110. Along 110 turns into it, rather.
Yes, 16 and 110 intersect in downtown Van, and then 110 goes north to Grand Saline, and 16 continues on east to Garden Valley, and then ultimately intersects I-20.
Right, and then 110, they're kind of together for a little while there and split off at some point east of Van. But probably, what would you say after having been in Van all the time that you've been there is probably the biggest improvement that you've seen over the course of your time there?
Well, of course, the Brookshire's grocery store moving in. There was always the Van Food Center, which was a small hometown independent grocery store. But Brookshire's came in. That was a huge boon to us. Fast food coming into Van, that has improved a lot. But the real strength of Van surfaced and really came to light in that 2015 tornado, when it came in and wiped out about a third of the city and 2/3 of the school system there. People came by the thousands, and the community came together and just worked tirelessly day and night to clear the debris, to rebuild, and to make things livable. So everyone came together, and that really revealed the true character and the backbone of the citizens of
There
Van.
was a saying there for a time, "We are Van."
That's it.
I love it.
Still used to this day.
Is it still? Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And then even this year, on May the 28th of this year, 2024, some strong 80-mile-an-hour straight-line winds came through, blew the roof off of my building downtown. And even that relatively what we would call a minor event, we still had people that came out, went door to door downtown, knocking on doors, asking, "Are you okay? Is everything okay? Is there anything we do to help?" So when hard times hit like that, it really brings out the character of a community.
Yeah.
And Van has a lot of character.
I guess there's always going to be kind of some mainstays that'll always be there in Van, and one of my favorite, especially to visit around the holidays when they really go all out on decorating, is the dinner bell.
Oh, yeah, the dinner bell is an icon.
Yeah. And that's right in downtown Van. It's right on the main drag. You will not find better home cooking than right there at the dinner bell. And every year, I think it's around November or so, they put up their Christmas decorations.
Yeah, they decorate.
And they're epic.
It's epic. It's regional. It draws people from all over Texas to come to the dinner bell, and to the benefit of everyone, their food matches the decoration.
Yeah, if it wasn't, even if they didn't decorate, the food would be a great reason to come. But coming and enjoying a meal during all of that is a pretty cool thing to see. There's a lot with the Christmas event coming up that we've mentioned here that you can see and do, of course, in Van, and just a lot of progress, but still keeping that feeling of a small town. And that's why whenever we talk about Van in the promotional stuff that they do, we talk about coming for a visit or stay a lifetime, because that's what you ended up doing. You came and you stayed a lifetime. You grew a family there. You built a business there. Tell me about your business. Since you're here, we might as well go ahead and tell them about you.
Well, I'm a farmer's insurance agent. My dad was a farmer's insurance agent for 25 or 30 years. He retired. I didn't want to go down to Corpus Christi and take over his business, so I worked with farmers to open an agency there in Van, which I did 32 years ago. So I have a farmer's insurance agency. On the other side, I have an independent agency. So it's been real good for us, and I still go to the office every day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we want folks to get online and check out all the great things going on in Van. Probably the best thing to do is head to vantx.gov, and while you're there, I want you to check out more about this Christmas experience that's happening in Van on December the 7th. That is a Saturday, so make sure to plan to travel to Van for this. They have the lighted Christmas parade, which, like I said earlier, is a tradition that goes back. I remember going to this parade all my life as a kid. Tree lighting, pictures with Santa, and fantastic. I said that right. Fantastic photo ops provided by the local businesses. Are you going to be getting in on that?
I'm going to be there.
All right, good deal. So you'll have a fantastic photo op out there for them. And you can get more information by visiting vantx.gov or calling 903-963-7216. Before we get out of here, anything that I didn't ask you about that we want to make sure we tell folks, whether it be history or current stuff about Van that we need to make sure they know about? So, kind of some final thoughts on it.
Van schools are great. Van churches are great. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to do business. It's centrally located to Shreveport or Dallas. So
now that my son's football season is wrapped up, I've been seeing, we have some friends that have a son playing football, and I'm like, we need to go because that stadium is fabulous. That is probably one of the best stadiums in East Texas. I love that stadium. Yep. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, go watch some football too. It's a great place to visit. It's a great place to put down some roots, and I can say that firsthand. This man over here can say that firsthand. So check it out, and thank you for coming in here and talking to me. And I learned something today. Learned a lot about Van today that I didn't know already.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you, folks. So get on over and check out everything going on in Van. VanTX.gov, and thanks again to Dwayne Wheeler for being my guest today here. Expedition Texas, the podcast, is presented each and every time by our friends over at Crazy Water, the best thing to ever come out of the ground in Mineral Wells, Texas. Get your Crazy Water on the grocery store shelf at your favorite grocery store, and of course by the East Texas Oil Museum at Kilgore College. Be sure to head by and check them out as well, and tell Olivia Moore that we sent you. And we'll be back here next week for another great story. For Dwayne Wheeler, I'm Bob Malden. This is Expedition Texas, the podcast, and we'll see you next time.